Welcome to the Real Estate Secrets Podcast for healthcare professionals.
Hey guys, welcome back to Commercial Real Estate Secrets. I'm your host, Austin Hare. Our guest is Brian Colao. He's the director of the DSO industry group at Dykema. Dykema is a national full-service law firm that specializes in healthcare. Also, they host one of the biggest DSO conferences of the year. I'll be there this year. It's July 13th through 15th in Denver, Colorado. So for anyone listening, it'd be great to see you out there. So Brian, it's a pleasure to have you on the show as a repeat guest, my friend. So let's talk about multiples. Obviously, you're very involved in the M&A market. What have you seen multiples like? You know, they're going up, right? We know that. But how much have you seen them go up? And like, what do you think is going to happen as we come into this? There's a little bit of inflation. There's interest rate hikes at the Fed. There's more conglomeration. I mean, what's your take on and what do you already see happening in 2022?
Yeah, Austin, I think what we're going to see is, for the groups, right now at present, you can see the groups are, they're approaching, you'll see 14, 15, 16. I saw an 18 multiple, which, reminds me a lot of what went on in 016 and 017. I think that's going to come back down to earth, at some point, 10s, 11s, 12s. I think for the solos, you're seeing them trade even at sometimes 8s. Now, I think you're going to see that go back down to 5s and 6s. When that happens, I don't know. But my sense is there's a mini bubble going on, but it's very explosive. And the reason that there's just such explosive is there's pent-up demand still from COVID, people that postpone their deals that are now getting around to doing their deals. There's, just an insatiable demand on the buy side and somewhat limited inventory on the sell side. There's plenty of sell side inventory, but not enough to satisfy all the buyers, put it that way. And there's a desire by some folks that went through this whole pandemic and just said, I'm over this. I don't want to do this by myself. If this is going to keep hovering around, I want to have a partner. So there's a lot of factors at play that are causing, the market to really be explosive. I think it's a mini bubble again. It'll go down a little bit, but it's not like a big bubble that's going to burst and go away. I think it's going to go from crazy money to really good returns, solid returns.
So yeah, let's parse out multiples in terms of Ebitda, because I know it's like the general kind of rule of thumb that we use in the DSO space is number of locations, but that's not always 100% accurate because there's a vast difference in Ebitdas per location based on, just depending on what type of specific niche you have. So it's like, do you see, when you mentioned earlier, we're seeing multiples of sole proprietors at 8 right now. Is there a certain Ebitda threshold like that determines that? So for instance, if you're doing, let's just say $1 million in revenue, 250 in Ebitda, are you going to be like on the lower side or the higher side of those multiples? And then, how do you see that change as you get into like the number of groups too?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Austin. And it's a complicated algorithm. Okay, let me, I know we have a little time to explain, so I'm going to take up a little bit of our time here because it's complicated. Yeah, this isn't like a 30-second show. We got a few minutes to talk about stuff. What goes into the valuations, okay, just in general, are what is your payer mix? The more Medicaid you have, the lower multiple as a general rule. The more Medicaid you have or government programs, the less, rather, the higher multiple you have. That's one thing. Second, how much infrastructure do you have in place? If you've got a mature organization using the latest, greatest practice management software, the latest, greatest financial and accounting reporting, the latest, greatest technological stuff. You're using artificial intelligence for case acceptance and things like that. You're going to get a higher multiple. If you've not upgraded in years and you're operating like 1975, you're going to get a lower multiple, on stuff like that. 3, your skills as an operator. You're the seller. You're often going to be asked to stay involved for 3 to 5 years after. If you look like an entrepreneur and, they can keep you in place as the CEO of the organization, you're going to get a higher multiple. If they're going to have to replace the whole management team, you're going to get a lower multiple. Your ability to integrate specialties or the degree that it's already integrated into the office is going to affect the multiple. Your plan for growth. If they look at you and say, gee, you're 4 locations, but the things you're doing right now, your footprint, what your culture is, we could easily see 25 or 30 locations, or you got one location and they're like, wow, we can replicate this concept to 10 or 20. Yeah, you're going to get a higher multiple versus what I always say is my ski. The example I've used in the past is my ski practice up there in the mountains of Colorado. They called me. They were killing it. They had a $10 million practice. They had a monopoly on all the ski resorts. And they're like, so we're going to get a giant multiple. And I said, no, you're not. Well, what do you mean? Because you've got this individual bubble where you're killing it up in the mountains. I appreciate you got a $10 million solo clinic because every resort up in Colorado goes to you, but I can't replicate that. What am I going to do? Find like 10 other skiers? I mean, you've got a really unique circumstance where you're killing it, but I can't look at your $10 million practice and say, oh yeah, I got a footprint to do 20 more of them. I don't. So that's the thing. If they look at you and say, wow, what these guys did right here, they can do 20 more. Yes, absolutely. Versus, hey, it's a one-time thing. It's going great for them, but that's just a unique, sort of geography, or they're on the campus of IBM or Oracle, and that's why they're killing it, but we don't have 25 other IBM campuses here. We can't do it. Something like that. That's also, going to govern your ability and your culture. Finally, the last thing is your culture is going to govern, the multiple that you get. So you look at all of these things. You also look at the individual demand for your office. This is sort of like gambling. Certain buyers are in the market at a certain time. Other times, those buyers have located acquisition targets. They're in the middle of a deal, or they just closed a deal and don't want to do another because they're integrating something. If you hit at the right place at the right time, when everybody, all of the best buyers for your practice are in the market and interested, and they start bidding against each other, then that's another factor. Finally, this is becoming less of a concern, but how you've recovered from COVID. This was a huge issue at the end of 2020. It was a big issue the first 2 quarters of 21. It's becoming much less of an issue, but if you're in New York or California or some of these states that's still doing lockdowns and restrictions and things, that will play a part as well, how you've recovered from COVID.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so it is a complicated formula. It doesn't just come down to the number of locations. It doesn't just come down to your Ebitda. I mean, it's the whole picture, quality of earnings, and then.
Well, yeah, Austin, sometimes the best thing you can do is close a location, right? Mm-hmm. You show up, and I see this all the time. Somebody wants to hire me, and we're evaluating their organization, and they're like, we got 10 locations, and 8 of them are making money, and 2 are hemorrhaging cash, so we're going to market. And I'm like, no, well, we're going to close these 2 offices, because if we close these 2 offices, your EBITDA will go up and your organization will be more valuable. So I think hypothetically, but I see this often, us going to market with 8 locations is going to be more lucrative than going to market with 10 locations. So, the number of locations really is a secondary consideration to EBITDA and all of these other factors we've been going over.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it makes a lot of sense. Hopefully it helps people listening into this who are thinking about doing an exit. So, yeah, the other thing that's on everybody's mind right now is inflation, right? Like we've seen they came out with the CPI 7.9%, highest we've seen in 40 years. There's a lot of reasons for that. In your opinion, and I'd like to go into detail on this, do you think it's transitory? Do you think it's permanent? We've got the Fed talking about rate hikes. We've got supply chain issues. Obviously, interest rates determine how much the cost of borrowing, which determines how much you can pay for practice. So, it's all related. What are you seeing?
My gut, and most of the economists and people that study this, really carefully, tend to think, I of course could be wrong on this. Don't anybody invest anything on what I say, but my gut is this is more looks like transient. This is not 1974 with OPEC and prices, and I don't even think you were alive then, Austin. I was. If you went to the bank, for anybody listening that's young, the interest rates were like 15%. If you had crazy. Like $1,000 in the bank, you got $150, interest on that a year, and if you had, think about this, if you somehow had $1 million in like 1975 or 1978, that would give you like $150,000 a year of income on just $1 million.
It's hard for me to even fathom that. That interest rate is just so high.
I remember I was a senior in college, and Marine Midland Bank, which I think is HSBC now bank or whatever, but they sent me a letter, and I opened it up, and it said, due to the market conditions, we are lowering our interest rate from 6% to 5.5%. So even in 1992, when I was graduating in college, you were getting like 5.5%, 6%. They were apologizing that now the interest rate was only going to be 5.5%. But obviously today interest rates are fractional. There's fractions of a percent. I mean, you could have many millions of dollars in the bank, and you might get a couple $1,000 a year. You're not going to get anything, off of that really. This is not that. Okay, this today is not those conditions in the 1970s that resulted in 10 or 15% interest rates. I do think it's going to come down to working out some of the supply chain issues, working out some of the post-COVID, sort of issues, some of the short-term, there's now a war in Ukraine. There's just things that I think are acute. They're not going to be permanent. They got to get worked out. And if some of these things get worked out, and also philosophically, this is not a political show. We're not going to delve into a whole bunch of political issues, but suffice it to say, some of the policies pursued, by the Trump administration did result in low inflation, and some of the things that are occurring now with the philosophical changes are triggering higher inflation. So I think, the midterm elections will be real helpful here. I think if during this midterm election, the Republicans end up taking control of the House or the Senate or both, I think you may very well see some of this inflation issues get abated.
Yeah. The Fed they're walking a tightrope right now because you've got their mandate. They have two mandates, keeping unemployment low and keeping inflation around 2%. Inflation is obviously way higher. The kind of unspoken mandate is to keep the economy going, keep the stock markets from crashing. And so the problem is, when you have really high inflation, you need to kind of increase those rates to slow down the growth a little bit. But also, I mean, inflation doesn't necessarily mean a strong economy, right? It just means the prices of things are rising. And so it's like, as they taper those rates and they keep adding those rate hikes, you're really a fine line between having a market crash. And so you can see it, right? Like every time, for everybody who follows the markets, every time there's a Fed meeting, I mean, the markets go crazy. It's been crazy volatile. It's either way up or way down based on what they think Jerome Powell is indicating or hinting at about the rate hikes. And, but in one sense of like they have to in order to taper down this inflation, but if they do it too much, then we're kind of close to going into a recession based on a lot of economists. Like I think we're in a secular bull market, right? Like a 10-year time horizon. I think things are good, but short term, we could see a lot of volatility. We could see a lot of decline, and so the more they hike these rates, then the less people are going to borrow, and so that gives people in the DSO space who are doing mergers and they're doing acquisitions, they have a little bit less dry powder to use to take down these practices. And so I think, like, depending on how much they hike rates, we could see the multiples go down. Do you think that's an accurate assumption? Like, are you guys thinking through that, or do you think that this train is just too powerful to be derailed?
The train is both. The train is too powerful to be derailed. Okay, and I'll tell you why. Dentistry is recession proof. Okay, it survived the financial collapse of the subprime mortgage crisis in 06, 07. If you go way back, most people remember that. If you want to go way back to the .com crash in the early 2000s, it survived that. If you want to go even further back to some other things in the 70s, it survived that. So dentistry is basically recession proof. It's proven to be pandemic proof. There was a hiccup when everybody got confused and they shut the practices down just for a couple months, but there's been no literature whatsoever of any nature to support any widespread outbreaks of COVID at any dental offices. So the thing is proven to be pandemic proof. So it's recession proof, it's pandemic proof. If the interest rates go in such a way that make it undesirable to finance transactions, there's so much cash money on the sidelines, I really don't think it will derail the markets. It may, like I said, the mini bubble, it may lower some of the multiples a little bit, but if you are a seller and you want to do a transaction sometime in the next 5 years, you're going to be able to do it, and you're going to be able to get a solid return. Whether that return is a 9 or a 10 instead of a 13 or a 14, that very well could be
Hmm.
the case, but it's not like drop down to a 2 or a 3. Oh my God, you can't sell this anymore. Not going to be the case. Dentistry is too strong. So it's both. The train is so powerful, it can't be derailed, but it's not completely immune to like the mini bubble as we've been talking
Yeah, it
about.
makes sense. I think the takeaway is, could mergers and acquisitions be affected by interest rate hikes? The answer is yes, but not to a huge degree, right? Not to the degree that would necessarily motivate you to sell today versus optimizing your organization for the next 3 or 4 years and selling down the road. I mean, it's not going to be significant enough to where you're going to see like a massive cut in prices.
That's right. That's
Okay.
exactly right.
So, I think you mentioned earlier you have 500 clients in the DSO space.
More than I think it's like 530 something. But
Okay,
yeah,
so you get to work with a lot of guys hands on. I'm curious about the commonalities that you see.
and women. And remember, I'm on the board of Women in
Mm.
DSO, so every time I've got to work with very, very talented women in the DSO industry, and of course, there's some guys too.
Yeah, just a couple.
Just a couple.
So what do you see the commonalities between the best groups? Like obviously everybody has like, things they do really well, they have niches, but like are there any commonalities between the really successful practices or the fastest growing groups that you can talk about?
Culture. Yes. I mean, the answer is yes. And the thing that overwhelmingly jumps out at me is culture. Those organizations with the best culture that can attract and retain talent, and the patients know that the dentists and the staff love working there and they gravitate towards those organizations with the best culture are doing the best right now in this
Okay.
marketplace.
So let's talk about that.
And I've got Medicaid. Funny thing is, I've got Medicaid offices that have great culture and they're doing well. I've got non-Medicaid offices. I've got some that take everything, but the common denominator to me is culture. If you've got that incredible culture, you're doing really, really well in this marketplace.
So yeah, I think that's cool, and I think it's a great point to talk about. I think also the word culture gets thrown around as a buzzword. So what do you mean specifically when you talk about culture?
I mean, people have bought into what you're doing, okay? Like, that's a good question you asked because, often every organization says they have good culture, but the tricky thing is I've never once, heard someone, Steve Built from Smile Brands had this great quote one time that everybody's, culture that they espouse, the values that they say, they always sound great, but then you got to look and see what actually happens at the organization. And often the things that some people are saying are not sort of what comes true at the organization. But here's the thing about culture: you've got to have values that fit your mission statement. We're going to deliver high quality, affordable dental care to all the citizens of, Dallas, Texas or something. And, that might be your mission statement. We're going to treat everybody with dignity and respect and make a safe environment. And then you got to make sure you're doing it. So one, you have to have values that make sense for what you're doing. If you had values like, we're going to charge the most amount we can for every dental treatment, yeah, that doesn't make sense. I mean, that might be your value, but it doesn't. You've got to have values that make sense for your organization. And then you got to implement it and you got to do it. And people have to buy in. Like I've been speaking a lot the last month at various DSOs individual partner meetings where it's just their organization. And I've been blessed. They've asked me to come speak at 2 or 3 of them across the country. I've got a couple more coming up. And you can tell. I mean, I'll never divulge identities, but you go to one and everybody's dressed to, absolutely dressed glamorous. And one was like an Academy Award. That was what they were doing. Like show everybody had glamorous outfits on. Everybody, those smiles were genuine. Everybody wanted to be there. Everybody bought into the culture. They were given standing ovations, like even jokes that weren't funny. People were laughing. It was just, you're like, wow, these people have bought into this culture. Then you go to another one, and again, we're not going to name names, and the smiles are fake, and it just, people are pretending that they like to be there, but they're not. Some people are in shorts and a t-shirt. Some people are a little more dressed up. It's just all over the place. Nobody has bought into the common idea of what's going on there. And, I get up there and I struggle. I come up with some remark, hey, it's good to be here, guys, but I kind of run out of things to say because you can tell, they're struggling. with their culture. So to me, culture, a couple things is one, they've bought into it. Everybody has bought into it. The smiles are genuine. Everybody wants to be there, and they're telling all their friends and family about it. New patients are coming to the organization. New employees are showing up because people are saying, I love working here. You should come over here too and get a job. And that's what culture means to me. I mean, I guess that's what
Mhm.
effective culture, well-run culture means
Yeah,
to me.
and that makes a lot of sense. I think I'm thinking of the example of Netflix, which is where they had their core values, which obviously they were an innovative, disruptive company, so they were doing things differently. And what was happening was people were coming into the organization, and then they didn't like whatever it was, right? Like the rate of growth, the focus on growing the business. I don't really even know, right? But they had their core values, and people would come in, like they get hired, and then they'd see the core values, and they matched up with the company, but they didn't like it, right? So what they did was they took their core values, they put it in their application process. And then when people were applying, they had to go through, they had to read the core values, and they say, hey, this is what we go by. And it deterred a lot of people, but it also attracted the right people. So it really helped. I don't want to say turn their business around, but it definitely helped their hiring process. But I think to harp on what you're saying is that they not only had core values, but they followed through to their core values. Because there's nothing worse than having core values, something written on the wall that you don't follow at all. But it can be very, very effective if you're true to
Yeah,
them.
yes, yes. And the scary thing is, you don't get to tell people. What you get to do is give it your best shot at your values. Here's our core values, and we're going to implement it, and we gave it our best shot. And then they tell you whether you're doing good or not. You don't get to tell them, "Hey, this is great. This is a good deal." They tell you. You give it your best shot. You implement your values, and then the workforce has spoken. They're going to tell you whether you've succeeded
Yeah,
or not.
yeah, and I think it's good to maybe have them a little bit polarizing too, because obviously, like things like integrity, honor, trust, like they never go away. They're always in style, but sometimes it's a given, right? Like we should do things like that, and it's like doing it. How do you frame it in a way, or how do you make it in a way that it really resonates with people? I think is important.
And nothing is more awkward than being in a meeting and listening to a CEO say, "We've got the best culture and we've got the best people." And you look out at the audience, and I mean, they're not buying it.
Right.
Nobody's buying any of it. Versus contrast that with one where the CEO's telling jokes that aren't even funny and they're laughing, and then when he or she gets around to, "We've got the best culture," they jump on their feet and they're clapping, and somebody, true story, Austin, blows off one of those bull horns in the back. I don't know how they snuck it in there, but they're blasting off those horns at soccer games, or those vuvuzelas that they had at the World Cup, and it's just a chaotic, insane scene. But that tells you you're succeeding
Mm.
with your culture versus that
Yeah, I
room.
agree. Well, this is great stuff. I want to wrap up just talking about the Dykema event.
Yeah.
Last year I went and it was great. I mean, I had a ton of fun. It was packed out. What can people like? Why would you want to go? What can people expect if they decide to go there?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that. I mean, the absolute best content on stage. There's no hidden agenda. We're just trying to bring you the very best of the DSO industry, from buyers, from sellers to culture, what we're talking about, best practices, technology, artificial intelligence, accounting, lenders. I mean, all the best from the industry is going to be brought there, value added on stage. The networking is off the charts. We can make more introductions at this event. I mean, you saw some of the rooms last year just packed with people. We can make more introductions in one room at Dykema than it might take 6 months to get all these people, back together, and fun. I mean, just fun, just really, really cool, fun stuff. Last year we had Mia Hamm. We had a firework display. We had stuff going on. It's just fun, and it's a great networking event. It's fun, and it's the best content. That would be why I would suggest that someone
Yeah.
might want to
Okay.
come.
Well, I mean, I'll be there. So yeah, it was good last year, and I think it's gonna be good this year too.
You look like you were having fun to me. I don't know. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you
Yeah,
look
no,
like
it
you
was
had a
it was
good
a great
time.
time. It was really cool, and especially it was like after COVID, it was the first time kind of getting together in a long time. There's a lot of energy there, so I think that is gonna carry forward for a long time too. Okay, so
We're
what's that?
expecting people. I'm just wrap up. We're expecting 1,500 people, and we're expecting a
Wow.
complete
Wow.
sellout this year.
That's great. Okay. So, yeah, just in closing, where can people go to find out more information about Dykema and to find out more information about you?
Yeah, DykemadSO.com, DYKEMADSO.com. You can find all about me and the group and the conference, July 13th through 15th at the Gaylord Rocky Mountain Resort in
Okay.
Denver.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll put that, DykemadSO.com. I got that in the show notes. And is that how people, if they want to learn more about you, maybe reach out to you about working with you, is that a good resource as well? Or you want to...
Yeah, yeah, it is. My information
Perfect.
is there as well.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, Brian, thanks so much for your time. This is awesome. Looking forward to connecting with you in person here in a few months.
Austin, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure and a blast to be on your show. I really appreciate the
Absolutely.
opportunity.